Now begins one of the fights that I've been most anticipating that was set up out of these matches. I'd say outside of Celine and Suzaku, that this is probably one of the fights that I've wanted to see the most for a while. Like when it came to like the boss ones, like stuff with like Alderaan, that was definitely like a big one for me within the last arc. But the one that probably one of the most hype ones I've had in 100 Years Quest total. Again, I'm not counting the main boss fights. Anytime the main bosses of an arc are doing stuff, it's completely different. Those guys are extra hype given their like where they're at, their lore value, and obviously like their value in the story at the moment, and especially in whatever arcs they're focused in. Obviously, like Celine is right now. I'm gonna obviously value Celine versus Suzaku the most, but excluding that, obvious bias I would say towards that match. The gray one I think is going to be one of the more interesting ones, and at least based off of this first chapter that we got, it's done a good job at that so far, because this first chapter was more just giving us a demonstration of them having a back and forth, and obviously like a demonstration and showcasing of one of Hakuni's spiritual artifacts, as well as Gray's response to it. I actually thought that was really good. I know there are some people that weren't as much of a fan of it, because they're like viewing it more of almost like a groovy fan service thing, but I don't think that's the case, because it wasn't set up really like it was just some like, oh cool, let's have the setting where Gray and Juvia are married. It's like, no, it's clearly an illusion. Not just, Juvia was involved in it. We had Grige, which I'm very, very in like high anticipation of when the point we get to like main cast children, to know if Natsu, Gray, and all these guys are gonna name their kids the same names, knowing that they had the same names in Edelus. It's not like it's not like it's impossible, but it'd be kind of strange, like if characters are named like having same names because they're like alternate versions of each other. It's completely different, I would assume, if you know of them first. Like, it would be like if somebody met Gray, met Silver at some point, and then found out that he had a son named Gray, and then was like, I'm also gonna name my son Gray, and it'd be like, why don't you have your own kid name? I don't know. To me, it'd be a little, not like bad strange, but just kind of be like, alright, I guess that's still technically you in another universe. You probably got your reasons for it. Either way, we saw Old Tier, Silver. I think seeing the other characters were way more of the impact for Gray's fantasy than just like being with Julia, having a son and stuff. Because out of those people, those are all people that, died and were sacrificed in line with Gray. Obviously, Tier. I was gonna say Ol, and then I was like, well, it's like that name, the toss up between those, I've seen it as I've seen it as Ol, then I'll see. Obviously, then you have Old Tier, how her name kind of derived from like her mom and stuff. It always jumbles me up a small fraction of the time when I get into it. But people who had to put their lives down on a line for Gray. And I know Old Tier is different, because like hers using Lost Ages was a completely somewhat different scenario, but obviously still Gray still blamed himself to a degree, because that's the second person, especially in that family, that have had to sacrifice themselves for his involvement. Like with it's way more direct, whereas with Old Tier, it's that he was he was part of it, and he saw himself as being directly roped into that whole setup. As well as like with Silver's isn't the same, but we know how Silver was when he actually like met back up with Gray and had his whole stuff on how he wanted his own son to finish him off, and how he was just happy to see him, and everything was because of his kind of revenge journey for his, well, assumed dead son and dead wife. Wife's still dead, but Gray's alive and going. So when it came to those moments, I thought those were way more of the point, way more vital to what was going on. I actually would say the only like part about that dream sequence that I would be kind of like, my eyes narrowed down is Silver hitting on Old Tier, mainly because like Ura's right there, and Ura's Old Tier's mom. I feel like that would be a little bit strange, as well as like Old Tier looked like her normal self. Silver looked like how we saw him, but Hers was a little different because when we saw the other people, you know, that was previously before Lost Ages. Altair was like, that was how she looked in the point in the timeline. And I wouldn't imagine she would look that different now. It's only been 2+ years since then, 2 years and some change. You know, since they ended up running into the crime source here before the Grand Magic Games, and Silver was, you know, an undead. Where it's like, for her, it's been a while. Like, it's been what, like 16+ years? Actually, more. I think Gray joined 10 years prior. So it was like, 10 years prior to like the start, whereas like Natsu was like 7. I think Gray's was 10. I'd have to go back and look at the chronological setup for that. I'm pretty sure Gray's is 10. I remember Gray's being a good chunk longer than a lot of the other people. Obviously, besides Kana. Kana was the first out of that whole gen line of people who were in the guild. But I don't know. I just was wondering, like, wouldn't he, if you were gonna make it like a believable illusion, because Gray knew it was an illusion. He knew it was more like a dream. You know, locked in, it's kind of more like a mental illusion. He knew it was an illusion, but it was just that kind of that like draw into desire. Like these are people that if they were just alive, he would be happier. And we do get that line near the end where he said that he's not in it like to make himself happy anymore. He's there to make Juvia happy. And I do like that. I thought that was really nice because Juvia really, especially after the stuff with Silver, it showed like her dedication to him, and obviously like, you know, she's not just simping him because he's cool. Like, she obviously has like very strong feelings towards him. Like, everything we know about Juvia, but it was like around that time when Gray started to really kind of like take those feelings seriously and stuff. So it's really nice to see the gap of where Gray was, when him and Julia first met versus like now. But it also gives us a lot of general content towards his character and like how he sees and feels things, just based off of those chapters where it's like he knew it was not real, but it was like that like calling into temptation that was gonna lock him down. But he ended up just kind of like breaking through that because it was something that he knew, even if he wanted it. It's not something that he could really have. But I was gonna say, like, if it was instead designed to be like one of those illusions that really trick you, like, oh man, whatever you're experiencing before that was a dream, you would have had to age up Altair, or sorry, Earth. Yeah, I like the names. I mean, it's a direct mother-daughter thing, so their names are so adjacent, their stories are adjacent to each other, so it's easy for me to slip up between the two. Either way, yeah, if it was one of those ones where it was kind of like more trying to convince you that it was real, I would assume they would have aged her up. I doubt she would look the same, especially considering now she would have to be like in her mid to late 40s, I would imagine. But after everything that's going on there, the primary point of the chapter when it starts out, we first get like Lucy and Mimi. Lucy obviously won. Mimi was on her feet still, but she's unconscious. Lucy's still conscious. She's not knocked out. So obviously the win goes to her. And then we like immediately get over to the Gray and Hakune stuff. And there was like a cool moment that just was it just was a kind of like a nice flex on their power, where you see like a Gray versus Hakune are kind of squaring up. You see like the snow going on there. And there's a comment from the Grand White Priestess that, oh, it's getting colder out. They're like, oh, it's snowing outside. And Ferris thinks it's a result of the magic swelling and magic getting too much. But, Wendy's smarter. She's like saying, oh, no, this is like an effect of, two ice people pretty much going at each other. Two, like, low temperature manipulating characters. So obviously it's going to get colder outside. I would say, though, I did really like that. I thought that was really cool. But this fight, this was really funny to me. And it's completely off topic. But it was, I remember when people were talking, like, it's especially recently, it came back up recently, the death battle of Gray versus Esdeath, which I did a video on it. It was very silly. You would have to know almost nothing about how, like, Gray's resistance to cold by itself before even becoming a Slayer. But, like, what being a Slayer of that attribute really entails him to. Because it was really weird how he was getting hurt by Estes ice at all instead of just eating it. I was going to say, though, like, it's funny because Gray has fought so many ice people, and now he's fighting another one. I mean, it's not like he only fights ice people. He's not like the freaking CW Flash, where somehow he only ever fights really fast guys whenever a season finale comes around. But Gray has fought multiple frost users and cold users. He fought Leon, he's fought Invul, he's fought Ultir, to a degree from the Historia. He's fought, I'm missing one. There's one person in my head. Can I count Rufus? I don't know if I can count Rufus. And then obviously you can count Silver. Like, Gray has fought a lot of ice and cold-based people, so him here, like, seeing these two, like, freeze each other's attacks, I thought was really cool. Because, like, I'd be curious to know, like, how it would work entirely. Like I guess it's still ice, but he would have to, like, extra freeze it over? Like, apply so much cold that it would kind of shatter, I would assume. I don't really know, just based on... I mean, I get it's a power, like, they have powers and stuff, but it's one of those things. I wonder if, like, Mishima tried to explain it with a little bit of science. Or at least more of, like, an in-depth description of, like, oh, you know, that cold just overwhelms whatever the temperature this is and whatnot. And we know that Gray can manipulate other people's ice, so I wonder if he would be able to do that here against Hakune, because this is a spiritual art, it's a whole different power system. But we know he can kind of copy, intimidate, and assimilate other ices into his ices, other types of ice abilities, into his own. We saw that obviously with this, but you know, the best example is when he was fighting Invul and he copied over his True Ice Kamui, which completely just neg-diffed through cold resistances and durabilities. It was like, yeah, even if you have those, this just kind of like cuts right past it. So I'm very curious if Gray has that. One thing that I did want to mention, I was driving home yesterday after work, and I was thinking about, like, oh yeah, cool, the chapter tomorrow. I mean, obviously I knew it was, but I was like, just like, you know, in remembrance of, like, oh man, I just got off work. What am I gonna do? Or, you know, what's the game plan? I remember there's gonna be a chapter, and I was thinking, I was hoping the fight would be longer than one chapter, and we already got that because of, you know, in this one. I'm hoping in the next chapter it does a little bit more fight stuff, maybe reveals Gray's transcendent magic, whatever Gray's upgrade is, and either leads into a third one or is able to finish off Hakune near the end of the next chapter. I would hope that it's not like open next chapter, 4 or 5 pages, and it's Gray, and then he just beats Hakune. I would hope that, like, if he's gonna beat her, it would be on another focused chapter, or if Mishima was gonna go that route and kind of like have her lose on like a couple, you know, like a third or half of the way into a chapter. I hope it'd be the one after the next one. So it'd be like this chapter that we got today, one more, and then like maybe the fight wraps up in the one after that. So what is this? Chapter 84. So it'd be 86. Would be my hope for that. But my hopes for this chapter, when I was thinking about Gray, because obviously the Transcendent Magic is one that I want to see for any of these characters at any point. But for Gray, I really wanted to see him use Ice Make Lance or Freeze Lancer, and then his archery. Because I've brought it up a decent amount on the channel. Not too many times, where it was just like, it'd be an obvious, it'd be a beaten and dead horse. But Gray using more archery than melee attacks. And one of the ways I wish that he would do it is he's already copied and like shown he can imitate the True Ice Kamui. So I assume, at least, it's not confirmed, that he can replicate it and do it again. And like I said, it's ice that will just kind of freeze you, and your stats and durability and resistances don't matter. I would assume you have to either be outright so much more powerful than somebody casting that or using that kind of ability, or you would have to have an like a power that can nullify it, that it just kind of like exists in a higher tier or plane of like how it works, like just some form of like full erasure kind of ability. But from that, I really wanted to see the I really wanted to see archery and either, again, Lance or Freeze Lancer, and I got to see both. I was very happy about that. I was very happy to see them about Gray, and like I said, like archers don't seem to get like a lot of love for whatever reason. Like whenever we got archers, they don't get their whole full time in the spotlight in a lot of these series. I mean, like obviously like Gray has used archery a lot. He's way more kind of like mixed in having lots of different weapons to use, but him always having archery I always thought was a good thing. But I just remember where I was going with the with one point. But if he had the True Ice Kamui, or at least he made like essentially True Ice arrowheads, and then he started sniping people from like a mile away with his bow, he would pretty much be able to high speed shoot someone with an ice arrow that completely just says nope to their durability and resistance. It would just be a really hacked power. I did a short video on like another power idea I had if Gray had learned how to do moon drip, which would be cool. But I feel like it'd be so OP if Gray could just make like essentially make like an anti-magic set zone, an area that just dispels magic. Because we did see in this chapter that he focused, for a good chunk of the beginning on using his devil side. When the first part of the chapter starts, you see him use ice make lance. I'm curious to know. I'm not gonna hassle the translation group if it was a issue from the mangaka, or it was Mishima or Ueda, or if it was in the translations, because it should be Freeze Lancer, because Freeze Lancer was the upgrade to just Lance. It's not a problem to me. I don't have any issue with it. It's just something that I noticed. I was kind of curious about. It's whatever. But then Ikune just goes up, puts her hand up, and freezes it. It's like no problem to her. And then she starts kind of like freezing Gray over again. And that's when Gray uses his Devil Slaying abilities. He has the Devil Arm kind of go over, his hair starting to lift up. And she's saying how her power in her Frost effect is kind of like cut in half because of that. My guess is like when he has that kind of a power up, that black kind of layer over his body, it's not necessarily the same as like a magic or a curse in that regard. It's kind of like how dragon slaying magic stems from magic, obviously, but being able to cancel out magic stuff wouldn't affect the dragon portion of their body, because the parts of their body that are altered from dragon slaying magic are permanently genetically altered. It's not the same thing. It's like it's magic in origin, but it's no longer an effect of magic kind of thing. That's what I assume Gray's whole demonic power is. It'd be like, oh, well, the part of your body that is demonic, like, she can't just shut off kind of thing, I would assume. I think that some of the wording in this area it's definitely one of those ones that will make more sense with the official translations. But she's like just doing her thing. She's just this big attack snow wave. It's just like this big mass, obvious wave of snow, but it's like her spiritual art snow. I assume it would have like a similar effect, maybe like diamond effect, where it's just applied differently, kind of like Doom. Like his spores relatively all did the same thing, but his attacks and stuff were all just different ways it was dispensed. But Gray's they're just having their back and forth. He's freezing her stuff, she's freezing his stuff. He pulls out again. Happy about archery. His Ice Devil Zeroth Destruction Bow, shoots that. The arrow doesn't even get to her. I think the thing about like her freezing, because she hasn't used a similar attack. She's just used her Snow Wave at this point. Well, at the time where Gray uses his Destruction Bow, but she freezes the arrow in mid-air. It's not like she stopped it and froze it. I think the fact that it literally froze in mid-motion and then just kind of like fell and collapsed is actually more impressive than just outright freezing it, because she essentially nullified all of the kinetic energy of a very powerful shooting arrow. Because we've seen not just going into like feats and like scalings and whatnot, just from probably the first big archer moment from Gray when he used his super freeze arrow against Racer. Like that arrow hit him and he was sent flying. So the level of speed and power behind that was crazy. And Okune can just kind of like null it out. It's like she doesn't care. And that's when she goes to use a new technique and wraps him up in the snow that puts him in this illusion. He's seeing all these things about like Julia, like a kid between them, his dad not being there. Actually, now that I think about it, it's not like a bad thing, but you would assume if he's like thinking all these things about like people that are dead probably because of him, maybe, or at least in his mind he's seeing it that way, and why he didn't have his mom, like Mika. I would assume that if it was more of like just like the people that died, that passed, that he loved, that his mom would be here. But I think with Ul and Ultir, and Ultir, that it was more about the people that he kind of blamed himself to a degree for. Because though his dad obviously was dead before he even learned magic and stuff, I think he just still has a little bit of kind of self-blame over the confrontation and the interactions he had with his dad during the Tartarus arc and stuff. So he ends up breaking out of that, and that's what we get like the point at the end when he's saying that he isn't like he's not here for himself. He's like, I don't want to be happy. I just want to make Julia happy. The only thing I would say about that is it was a really abrupt end. I remember when I looked at the page this morning, I thought there was going to be one more. Like, you know, it was just felt weird for like a Mishima chapter ending, because it didn't feel like a, you know, what would end on like an episode, because that's usually how he sets it up. Like the end of a chapter usually feels like an end of an episode, almost cliffhanger-ish. I think it's because like this fight is like it wasn't in a spot where it was like building into a cliffhanger. Like if it was like Gray about to like fall into whatever the trap was, like if there was like, oh, if you know, there's one thing in the dream that if you fall for it, you're permanently stuck or something. If it was something like that, where it's like, oh, and he's about to, you know, do whatever the requirements for this ability to go off, that'd be a spot to leave it off. But it was just kind of weird where it decided to leave off at, just because it wasn't something that that you know that is the usual vibe at the end of a chapter in Fairy Tail. And it's not like it was you know, a similar chapter that had not a similar chapter, but a chapter with similar vibes at the end is when Natsu beat Alderaan, and there was like that. There was that panel near at the end when he was saying that you know, he's like, yeah, if the world makes an enemy of the guild, then I'll burn it all down. It was kind of like that, but you know, that was at the end of the big boss fight for the arc, where this was you know, this was essentially the first chapter into this fight, and I'm really hoping that we get at least one more full chapter of this. And I really do want to see what Gray's Transcendent Magic is. I don't need to see everything, but I'm really hoping that we can get like a slightly further form, progressed form for his Devil Slaying. You know, like an Ice Horn, or maybe like some just like new AoE. If we could see him do just like when Anvil started to fight a bit seriously, and we saw him just create this blizzard all around the whole area. If we could get something like that from Gray, I would love to see this giant kind of like what looks like a frost hurricane just covering up this whole area or something. And I know there's going to be some people who don't like it, but I do want some crazy feats from Gray. Just because like if Gray hasn't gotten any power kind of like boost upgrades yet, and this is like the time for him. I'd love to see Gray like really do something crazy to kind of demonstrate that in the first place. Like I don't need to be like straight like, oh, it's an upgrade if you look at these numbers and feats or whatever. I just want to see like a really cool big feat from Gray. I want to see him just like shoot an arrow and then it hits Hakune, and then you see like behind her for miles is just frozen. It's just like everything beyond where like the impact point of his arrow is just ice. It's just like miles of ice. Just like when just imagine when Silver froze the Sun Village. Like it's think that Gray did that, like just from the effect of one of his arrows or something, or an attack. I think that'd be really cool, and it would just be like a really badass flex. Maybe you could have something like, I'm just trying to think of like cool ways that you could add on. Have him like freeze clouds, and you see clouds just fall out of the sky as like solid frozen puffs of well, I guess they're moisture, but you know what I mean. It'd be really cool. I'm just thinking of like badass ways to go about this for Gray, because I definitely think Gray deserves it. He's been way more focused on his character in 100 Years Quest. All these other characters have gotten more upgrades and powers and stuff since then, but Gray's kind of been left, and we're at like, you know what, this is chapter 84 of 100 Years Quest. So we've been in this for years, and Gray hasn't gotten anything really new. So I'm hoping that can be now, or I guess really next chapter, or within this arc. It doesn't have to show his Transcendent Magic in this battle. Like, you know, my only overall kind of gripe would be like if we never saw Gray use the Transcendent Magic, I'd be really upset. I'd be really agitated. But it doesn't have to be this fight. But I would hope that we see it this fight, or at least part of it. Like I said, we could literally just get a Devil Slaying form with like a horn and some like you know, just like some of the markings progressed. Maybe he has like a different looking eye, or it's like the pupil's an X or something. I don't know, something kind of cool like that, where it just looks badass, and then just have Gray look like a monster, kind of like going about doing stuff. That's essentially what would make me the most stoked for Gray's fight. But we gotta wait obviously another 2 weeks before we get to more of this fight. My hopes are the next chapter is a full fight, and it doesn't end with Gray beating Hakune, unless we get like a lot of really cool showcases from both of them, some new powers and stuff. But otherwise, I would hope that it makes it into chapter 86, if only even for a couple pages. But anyway, other than that, no comment below. Thumbs up the video, front like button, subscribe button, and check out my other videos. Other than that, I appreciate everybody's already subscribed. Thank you all for listening. Bye.